For the past few months, we've been working with the Journal News on stories that they feature in their Sunday paper and on LoHUD.com. We're going to look back at some of them and talk about the reaction those stories have gotten. Plus, we're going to get some updates on the stories themselves. And we start with an emotional piece about the opioid epidemic and how families are sharing their stories as well as their tragic losses. Diane and Peter Ballas lost their son Peter to a heroin overdose 4 years ago. They placed an obituary in the paper that enabled them to tell theirs and his stories, to also honor their son and perhaps reduce the stigma of addiction. And Diane read that obituary for us.
It says, Peter K. Ballas, beloved son and brother, lost his battle with the disease of addiction Saturday morning at his home in Congress. Graduated from Clarkstown North High School in 2000. Continued his studies at SUNY Oswego, earning a BA in creative writing in 2004. A tattoo artist by trade, he will be remembered for the myriad words he produced that will live on past him. Peter survived by his parents, Peter J., Diane W., sister Taryn Ballas Harrigan, brother-in-law John Harrigan, and loved ones. He will be remembered by all as a kind, soft-spoken soul who viewed life differently than most. His art, music, and writing reflected a kind nature, befitting a man of peace. There are no words to express the pain of those he leaves behind. There's only the thought that his personal struggle is now over, and he has found some peace. If, after life's fitful fever, he sleeps well.
Yes, he does. He does.
After Diane saw the story that we ran, she texted FiOS 1 reporter Ray Ramundi, and we wanted to share that text with you. The piece was very powerful, and you all did a wonderful job, she wrote us. I cried through the whole thing. I had 2 sad calls yesterday in regards to different situations. One was from the mother of a friend of my son, Pete. Her daughter is an addict and homeless on the streets of New York. The other call was from a good friend whose grandson overdosed 4 months ago. Unfortunately, it just goes on and on, she wrote us. What you, the Journal News, and RNN TV are doing is helping so many people. Thank you for everything, Diane. Diane, you are more than welcome. We're joined now by Frank Scandale, the investigations editor for LoHUD.com. And Frank, hard not to listen to that. The obituary itself emotional, but to hear her reaction, it just, I'm curious what your emotions were as you watched.
Yeah, again, I've only seen some of it. Dave Robinson has been doing most of the investigation. And, but I've read those stories, I've read the obits, we've been tracing the story 2.5 years since I got there. David started with the opioid, he really dug into it. And we've come this, in 2.5 years, we've come to the point where we're listening to stories like that are just so humanizing to what this is about. And that's really what we're talking about. There's this dirty side to addiction that this family and others are now bringing to the forefront. And I think that's says something about our society, that we're saying, wait, this isn't the guy in the alley, this isn't, and that's what we've been trying to report for some time.
I'm also struck because in the past, this would be the kind of story that families might brush off to the side or try to hide or not share. And the fact that we are starting to get families that are very publicly sharing the pain and what they've gone through. Has that surprised you? Is it something of a coping mechanism for them?
It has surprised me because it has been in the shadows. I mean, I grew up around folks who were addicted and families who had it, and it was a hush-hush. And the numbers that Dave dug into, he combed the legacy.com, New York, and he looked at all the deaths and all the drug numbers, all the references. And so the numbers from when Peter died to now has exponentially grown, which means that maybe it's us, getting it out there, and people like that family who, as a group, they were willing to talk about it and not hide it. So I'm not quite surprised, but I'm heartened to see what's going on, because this is going to get to the real problem, which is the number of opioids that are being dispensed. I mean, other media, Washington Post, USA Today, we've all been doing those kinds of stories, and this is the human toll and it's hard to ignore.
Well, I think you just put your finger on it. The facts and figures are one thing, and they're astounding and they're saddening, but the human stories, the personal stories, I mean, it's what makes the work that you've been doing with the Journal News and LOHUD and us being able to share those kinds of stories has made it that much more dramatic.
And I think that's only going to grow. I think as the epidemic, I mean, we're heightened right now. I don't know how much farther it could go before there's some action. But those are the stories I think people come forward and share. It's going to make it harder and harder to ignore. If that family walked into Congressman A's office and told that story and read that obituary, who's going to say no?
All right, now to another story that we've covered with the Journal News, and that's the MetroNorth crash in Spuyten-Duyvil 4 years ago.
Right.
That, of course, killed 4 people. LOHUD broke the news about engineer William Rockefeller and questions as to whether he had sleep apnea or simply stayed up all night and was exhausted on the night before that deadly crash. Frank, tell us about the controversy, and there's been a bit of a dispute that's followed from that.
Absolutely. Well, Tom Zambito, who's been covering this story for some time, Tom's had long ties and sources to the rail agencies around here. So he's very well sourced, and this is the kind of story that's how it's going to come out. And for many, many years, we've been hearing the rumors about, was he really, I mean, you couldn't have both. Somebody pointed out, it's not exclusive to each other. You could have sleep apnea, but you could also have been up all night. And we've always heard these rumors that maybe he was up all night and he was tired. And so Tom kept working his sources, and he finally got to the Bronx DA that said, yes, we are investigating this report. We did investigate this report that he was up all night or he was up late and
Right.
he didn't get much sleep. And the linchpin of the story was, did he indeed tell his assistant, one of the assistants, hey, keep an eye on me, you got to keep me awake. And so they investigated that, and in fairness, they couldn't conclude that that was true, but that was an investigation, and that, of course, has a lot of impact on the engineer's $10 million lawsuit against the rail agency.
And lest we think this is just an academic question as to, figuring out the specific cause of the crash, there is a human component to this as well. We spoke with a woman named Nancy Montgomery, whose husband was on that train. Here's what she said to us.
Now that these stories are coming out, I'm angry. I'm really having a hard time, harder than ever before, and I want the truth, and I feel like, my family and I and every other victim deserve the truth.
People still want answers, still have the unanswered questions. And then, of course, there's what to do going forward, including questions about positive train control that would automatically slow these tracks. I think MetroNorth's going to miss the deadline next year on that, too.
Yeah, that's the way it looks like. Matt Coyne, our other transportation reporter, wrote that story that, he did the facts and figures and how much work was done and how little time is left. Now, MetroNorth says they're going to make it, and a lot of the work you don't see is sort of in the background. But there was a $1 billion grant, so a lot of money. And again, it's really coming down to safety. So the argument is on time versus safety, right? And so a lot of this, in this area, everybody's go, 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 and we got to get there.
Right.
But, I know commuter groups have said, listen, if you just talk to us, if you have this rapport and you give us information about what's going on, we're more understanding. But if you don't tell us anything, which of course is the great debate you always say, is like, how come I don't know this? How come I don't hear this?
Now to another transportation-related story that's gotten a huge response, and it's the Journal News piece about cashless tolling at the new Mario M. Cuomo Bridge. LOHUD spoke with people who are getting billed hundreds, even thousands of dollars for tolls they didn't even know that they owed money for. Frank, what's the latest on this?
Well, the latest on that is Frank Esposito, one of our new data reporters. He dug into it and tried to explain how the system works. So everybody's pointing at the New York State Thruway, but it's actually 3 private companies that run this. So they've contracted out. And so Frank has dug into them and explained what each does. There seems to be a glitch somewhere along the way. As you said, dozens of people have sent us. We're building a spreadsheet of all these people who have, and their tales are similar but yet unique all the time. But how they never got a notice, they haven't moved in 30 years. There's no reason why they shouldn't get it, and they swear they're not throwing out their mail.
Are these private companies getting a piece of the action? So if the bills are bigger?
We're digging. There must be a contract, right? Because they're not going to do this for free. But what we don't understand is the collection part of it. So Lineberger, Goggin, and I'm sorry, I forget the last name, but they're based in, they're across the country, but they're based in Texas. And they're the ones where at the end, if you're not paying your first 2 notices, they reach out. Now, we don't know the percentages. We haven't been able to get the contracts yet to say, do you get 10%? Do you get all of it and kick back something to the Thruway? So we'll be looking into that.
This seems like this is just a topic that's ripe for lawmakers to take action, or at least put the burden more on the companies, or ease some of the burden off of commuters, so that maybe the penalties aren't as severe, or there's an easier way for people to fight this thing.
There is some, Senator Carlucci and Tom Abernathy and I think Ken Zabrowski, they've all reached into this, but to see what happens. I mean, they're talking about lessening the fines, et cetera, but at the root of it is how is this working is really what we still have to get to. And how does the state say, nope, we send it, we crack it, we send it to where their car is registered, and it's more than dozens, it's now hundreds of people say, I never got a notice, and I'm up to $1,000. I have a whole sheath here. I was just looking at them today.
Frank Scandale, investigations editor for Aloha.com. We've only been doing this, unfortunately, for a few months, but I'm looking forward to see what else comes in 2018. Some great pieces, some great work.
Big
Thank
year
you very
coming
much.
ahead. Thank you.
Thank you
for having me.
Up next, my conversation with veteran journalist Marvin Scott. He's been reporting for a half century, and he shares some of his stories with us.